You are listening to MFM 92.6. Move to the music.
Beautiful music from Umama Usibongile Khumalo. Hey, siyabonga bawo. We've inherited a beautiful place to live, a beautiful place that we call home, and we are forever grateful. That is how we start the show today, on that very grateful note. The song is called Seliana by Umama Usibongile Khumalo. Beautiful music. It's SiyakhulaLive, officially in the building.
The best tunes that make you move to the music. MFM 92.6.
It's 10 after 6 on my watch. If you've just joined us, well, look at that. You are right on time. Welcome to the show. We call it SiyakhulaLive on MFM 92.6. We're growing our humanity together, and we make award-winning radio simultaneously. That's what we like to do every Wednesday evening between 6 and 7, having conversations that inform and transform. I'm your host, Litlongani, and I'm so delighted to be in your company this evening, having big conversations as we like to do. And of course, you are invited to be part of the conversation, streaming us live from wherever you are across the world. It's www.mfm.co.za.
Stellenbosch, Kamandi, Clutersville. We've got you covered on 92.6. MFM 92.6. Move to the music.
SiyakhulaLive is proudly brought to you by the Stellenbosch University Transformation Office, as well as HR, keeping you informed and transformed. And coming up on the show today, we are having a big discussion unpacking the pervasive problem of sexual corruption in South Africa. What is that about? What is it? We are in conversation with Professor Sope Williams from the university's Faculty of Law. Professor Sope Williams is a leading expert in public procurement, anti-corruption and development law. We are in conversation with Prof Sope following the recent screening of the documentary Rising Voices, Unmasking Sexual Corruption in South Africa. Big conversation, of course, and I think many terms that some of us are learning for the first time, and it is a pervasive problem. I think we've encountered it in many different respects. So I invite us to be in conversation with one another. Let's come together and think together about some of the pervasive problems that are in our communities as well. So that's the conversation this evening. Huge conversation. Let's see if we can do it justice in just under an hour. It is SiyakhulaLive, of course. If you are on the WhatsApps, please do so. Share your reflections on our WhatsApp line 0744400926. What is your take on the problem of sexual corruption in South Africa? I'd very much like to hear your thoughts. 0744400926.
Be sure to like the MFM Facebook page, MFM 92.6, Move to the Music, and follow MFM on Twitter and Instagram at MFM 926.
These conversations are happening alongside good music. Like this. Juke Soul on your radio. The song is called Cure Cause. It's 12 after 6. Juke Soul on MFM 92.6. The song is called Cure Cause. It's 19 after 6 o'clock. And you're listening to SiyakhulaLive with myself, Litlongani. Good evening. Beautiful music coming your way, as we like to do. Move to the music. That's what we stand by on the show every Wednesday evening, of course. And of course, MFM all day, every day. We're about to get into a segment of the show that I absolutely love, where we get to learn through dialogue and engage with one another. Have a listen to this.
As I was doing my work, he started making uncomfortable conversations. He went on to smack me on my bum. I froze.
And then he said, and where you learn about power is in the bedroom.
The guy said, okay, we must have sex with him so that I can get a job.
The first thing that he makes a comment on is that I've got such a beautiful body. He made me fail the subject, just to spite me.
That's the conversation this evening. We're talking that and more. It is a snippet from the documentary that was recently screened here at the Stellenbosch University Faculty of Law. It was the documentary is called Rising Voices, Unmasking Sexual Corruption in South Africa. And joining me this evening to help us unpack this and help us unpack some of the themes that come out of this documentary, Professor Sope Williams from the Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Law. Prof Sope is a leading expert in public procurement, anti-corruption and development law. Prof, thank you so much for making time to chat to us this evening, and welcome to SiyakhulaLive.
Thank you, Katlego. Thank you for having me.
Prof, maybe let me start with some of your research interest in terms of, why sexual corruption as an area of research interest for you.
Right. So, to be honest, sexual corruption was not on my radar at all.
Yeah.
My main areas of research are public procurement, that's government contract law, and anti-corruption law. So a few years ago, I was investigating why women-owned businesses were not getting government contracts. And one of the barriers that I found in my research was that a lot of women-owned businesses, when they put in for a public tender, a lot of them, complain that they get a call that, if they want to win the contract, they must meet this official in a hotel. So basically, they were being asked for bribes, but the bribe was to have, the currency of the bribe was to have sexual intercourse. And that's what really brought my attention that this was a problem. But I was looking at something else. I was looking at gender responsive procurement, and it came up as a big issue in that sphere.
So, Prof, how would you define sexual corruption and where and how do we see it playing out in our societies and public procurement?
Right. So I will define sexual corruption as an abuse of actual or perceived power that sexually exploits people who seek benefits or are seeking to avoid detriments that are tied to that power. And the sexual exploitation may be physical, so it could be physical intercourse or emotional or digital. So that's what, so it's basically, in layman's terms, when a bribe is requested of a person, but instead of a financial bribe or something that is equivalent in monetary terms, the bribe that is requested is a sexual act. That's how I would define it. So it's just when sex is the currency of the bribe instead of money.
Yeah. Sorry, Prof, you were going to continue.
Yeah, so, the way I see playing out, so as I said, my research was in public procurement, and I was looking for something else, and I found that this was an issue when I spoke to women entrepreneurs. But going further, I then had an opportunity to delve deeper into the topic and actually found that it's, clearly not restricted to public procurement. It's very, very prevalent in immigration services, especially from women who are, seeking visas or seeking refugee permits. Very prevalent in sanitation services where women have to get, water, very prevalent in the health sector, and also prevalent in housing. So there are a lot of victims who are, women seeking RDP housing, especially who, would be informed that they can get a house, but they must perform this act, of course, tied to jobs as well, happening to learners in high school, happening to students in university. So I would probably say the way it plays out in our society, it plays out everywhere. You have women and you have men in power.
And I think that's why we describe it as this pervasive, it seeps into all areas of our communities, of our societies, of our institutions as well. We are chatting to Professor Sope Williams from Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Law. Prof, you mentioned in your work that sexual corruption should be treated differently to other forms of corruption. Can you explain this for us?
Yes. So sexual corruption, I feel, should be treated differently because it is not just a corruption offense. It's also a form of sexual violence. I tell people that the sexual corruption is the marriage of gender-based violence and corruption, right? And of course, we know that we have a problem with gender-based violence. We have with sexual violence in South Africa and many other countries. And we also have a problem with corruption. So when you bring those two together, you get this. And because it's also a sexual offense, it can't be treated as financial bribery because the amount of psychological coercion that is imposed on the victims and the amount of trauma that it leaves victims with. Okay, so you can imagine that if someone, you're driving or whatever, and police ask you for, 50 rand for cool drink, whatever, even if you don't have much money and you have to let that money go, the impact on you can never be the same as someone forcing you into a sexual act to avoid, a traffic offense or to get your RDP housing.
For sure.
So the kind of damage that it does means that you cannot treat it as though it were a normal corruption offense or a normal bribery offense, because it is not.
And there's something also that you mentioned that I thought quite interesting, but maybe we can unpack that when we think about the legal framework and some of the gaps there. But perhaps you can also unpack what is this concept or what is gender responsive procurement all about, and do you consider it a necessary development in procurement?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So gender responsive procurement is the idea that, women or a woman's gender should not be barred to her accessing opportunities, including public contract opportunities. So we've seen that across the world. In a lot of countries, we have figures of between women-owned businesses getting between 5 to 10% of public contracts. And so the idea is, why are women who are participating in the economy? Now, of course, I have to add that women's participation in the economy is not at the same rate as men. So women own about between 30 to 40% of businesses, but only getting 5% of public contracts. There's a big disparity. And so the idea is, why are women not getting contracts? And it's a number of things. A lot of it is gender bias. It's just bias against women. A lot of it is this sexual corruption. A lot of it is the fact that sometimes businesses owned by women are not necessarily in the sectors where you have procurement opportunities. But as we work towards a fairer society, we have to ensure that we have that fairness in all sectors. The other thing why, for me, gender responsive procurement is important is because public contracts or businesses that engage in public contracts use that as a means of, growing their businesses, scaling their businesses, and it's a way of increasing women's economic empowerment, which also means that especially the South African context, it's really important because in South Africa, around 42% of children under the age of 18 are raised by single women. So if you want to address child poverty, if you want to address child malnutrition, if you want to address poor educational outcomes for children, you need to be ensuring that women are economically empowered, that women are financially successful. And so it's not just a focus on, gender equality in procurement, fairness in procurement. It is going through the lens of, are we interested in improving the lives of our children? Are we actually interested in achieving sustainable development goals? Because you can't do that without gender equality. You can't do that without women's economic empowerment.
We're unpacking the pervasive problem of sexual corruption in South Africa, and you as well can be part of the conversation. 0744400926. What is your take on this problem as well? Feel free to send me a voice note or your messages on our WhatsApp, 0744400926. Now, Prof, the documentary, Rising Voices, Unmasking Sexual Corruption in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about how did that come about?
Okay, right. So the documentary is really the brainchild of an NGO that we're working with called the African Women Against Corruption Network. The acronym is AWAKEN, and it's led by a woman in Gauteng, Siyakhula Live. And essentially, this NGO was set up about 3 years ago by Siyakhula in order to really look into how this problem is affecting women. And the documentary is basically an attempt to shed light on the problem and highlight the voices of victims. And, it's another way of disseminating information. It's a 20-minute film. Of course, it's easier to digest than reading my legal reports, right, on sextortion. So it's basically a way of highlighting this problem. They speak to victims, they speak to women who have had to overcome it, they speak to women who are still facing sexual corruption, they speak to legal experts, they speak to members of the community. So it's a really important project. And I think the other thing is that, of course, when you're trying to reach the younger generation, Gen Z or Gen Alpha, it's a great tool for informing them, especially, and it's being shown around the country in schools, letting young girls and boys, because I have to tell you that sexual corruption affects boys as well, right?
Okay.
So although it's mostly women, it's disproportionately women and girls, but boys are still affected. So it's showing this documentary to let them know that, look, you're not alone, and if this happens, it is wrong, and it's not your fault. Of course, there's always victim blaming when it comes to sexual offenses, but it's giving them a means of understanding that this is something that is terrible and should not be happening. And if it happens to you, then please report it to whoever you can. If you're a young person, your parents, or a responsible person at school or in your community.
And we can chat a little bit about those legal aspects as well, and the connection with justice as well in a bit. But maybe I want to also get some thoughts from you in terms of then, when women are in power, and how can women that are in positions of power and in managerial positions, how can women in power and positions of power make a difference in countering sexual corruption?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So I'll give you a story, and that will really explain it. So there's an NGO called Judges Matter, and they basically look at issues with our judiciary, and they started looking at the issue of sexual harassment in our court system, which and a lot of that sexual harassment is actually sexual corruption, because if you don't comply, then you lose a benefit or you suffer a disadvantage. And they found that in a particular court in the Western Cape where we're based, there was a lot of this going on with judges, lawyers, clerks, even cleaners, women who were cleaners were being harassed, and all sorts of things going on. And the situation remained for years until a woman was made the court manager. And as soon as this woman took this position, all the other women started coming out of everywhere saying, help us, this is happening, this has been happening, this judge does this lawyer does that, I can't do this, I can't do that. So the thing is, having women, and that lady, the court manager then, took up this case and had some impact on what was going on. But if that woman had not been, while there was a man in that position, none of the women felt comfortable to speak up, because they would say, well, but why didn't you refuse? It's consensual. What were you wearing? What did you say? I'm sure he was joking. All the things that use bad behavior from men. So the thing is that when you have women in positions of power, when you have women in managerial positions, it's not going to go away, but it will have a big impact. And in fact, one of the recommendations that I have in my report on sexual corruption is that we need to really, really consider in the public sector having real gender diversity at all levels, not what we have now, that you have women at the bottom,
concentrated,
a handful in the middle, and almost no one at the top. We need that throughout. We should be aiming for a 50-50 split. But if we're really being fair, women are 51% of the population. So really, but in 50-50 split, so that you dilute that homosocial, what we call homosocial networks of men coming together, clubbing together, and hiding each other's bad behavior. You break it by having the presence of women. It won't go away totally, but I really believe that it will make an impact just from this issue that happened in the courts in the Western Cape.
And I think it is that it stops cultures from perpetuating, or it causes a disruption in particular cultures that are pervasive in our institutions and in our communities as well. We're chatting and unpacking sexual corruption on SiyakhulaLive this evening. We're going to take a short song break, and Prof Sope is still with us. Just have a listen to this.
Stellenbosch, Kamandi, Cluttersville. We've got you covered on 92.6. MFM 92.6. Move to the music.
The song is called Ubuntu Sona Jobate. It's 36 minutes after 6 o'clock. You're listening to SiyakhulaLive on MFM. Prof Sope Williams is still with us on the line from the University of Stellenbosch's Faculty of Law and leading expert in public procurement, anti-corruption and development law. Prof Sope, thank you for staying with us. Now, I've been wanting us to also tackle kind of the legal framework against sexual corruption in South Africa. What is the legal framework against sexual corruption in South Africa, looking at the extent to which sexual corruption is criminalized and why those legal frameworks are not working?
Right. Okay. So the first thing I'll say is that corruption is an offense in South Africa, and sexual corruption can broadly come under the general offense of corruption or the general offense of bribery in South Africa. However, under our corruption law, which is called the Prevention and Combating of Corruption Act, under that law, a person who gives a bribe as well as a person who receives a bribe are both culpable under the law. So they're both equally right. So and that's how most anti-corruption laws are. The giver and the receiver are both.
Yes, but this is different. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can imagine a lady is requested for sexual intercourse before she gets her RDP house. If she acquiesces and engages in the sexual intercourse and she goes to report, she and the official will find themselves in the same jail cell, right?
Is that the current? Whoa, that's the current situation.
That's what the law says. So that is the main anti-corruption law. So that obviously doesn't work. The other law is our Sexual Offences Act, but that criminalizes sexual corruption if the person is under the age of 16. So you can be covered, but you have to be a young person. We also have the Employment of Educators Act, which applies to learners in school. And under that act, there is a sexual corruption offense, an offense that can be that describes as sexual corruption. But of course, you have to be a learner in a school, right? So if you're not a learner, too bad. The other legislation that we have is the Employment Equity Act. And the Employment Equity Act issues a code of good practice of the prevention and elimination of harassment in the workplace, which employers are required to take into account when they draft sexual harassment policies. And the sexual corruption is under that. But of course, that code will apply to people in the employment context.
Yes.
So yes, if you and so that's actually what a lot of victims of sexual corruption have used. The only problem, to my mind, is that if a person's employer doesn't have a sexual harassment policy that covers it, then of course you will have to you have to explain why this is an offense under the employment policy, but it's not a criminal sanction, right? It's not criminal law.
Yes,
so
it's disciplinary in the
Yes, so the person might lose his job or her job or whatever, but that person is free to get another job, is free to continue. There's no criminal sanction attached. And I think that's very important because this is both a corruption and a sexual offense. So it's a double offense in a way. The harm that comes from this is lingering. And if women have been subject to any kind of sexual assault, sexual harassment, sexual violence, how the impact is not. It doesn't go away.
Right.
It really goes away. So so we have it covered in this patchy context, but it doesn't cover fully. So, for instance, if you were, it doesn't cover you fully. If you wanted to report under the person's employment legislation, you'd have to know that how you can go to that person's place of work and what the reporting channels there would be, right? Working for immigration, request a sexual act from a woman to get her refugee permit. She has to then know where on in the Department of Home Affairs do I go?
Right. So it's all kind of
going to a police station where we all know where
it's compartmentalized into various
and very patchy. So it's problematic, and I think that's the problem, that it's covered in all these little patchy ways, but not coherently and not in a way that will give all victims redress. And from the criminal point of view, you will also be criminalized. So that has been the biggest problem, and a number of countries try to see that this is just not workable, and I've tried to address that.
It doesn't sound workable. I mean, far too many. I'm already seeing gaps, and again, without this coherent wraparound legislative framework, it may leave a lot of women, more vulnerable, and issues largely unaddressed. And so, I mean, I'm also thinking about this culture that we're speaking about, in workplaces, but also broader, the culture of patriarchy, and whether the framework, our legal frameworks, also speak to this patriarchy alleviation in various sectors of employment and public procurement as well.
100%. So the thing is that a lot of these laws were drafted from an androcentric lens, so a male lens. So when you look at corruption through the male gaze, you find you're thinking about men giving each other financial bribes, right? So you write a law to address what you think the problem is.
Right.
And it's so dangerous when you don't have gender diversity everywhere. Because there are just some things that, men legislative drafters cannot conceive of, because it's not in the frame of reference. And having everything being viewed through a masculine lens is really detrimental to women, and therefore detrimental to everybody else.
It fails to account for the kinds of harms that women are vulnerable to.
Yeah, I think that's why the fight for gender equality is a fight. It's necessary for all of us, because even men don't benefit when there's inequality. I mean, men are victims as well, And also, men are wives, they are fathers, they are brothers to women, they are partners to women. No man, I think, wants to hear that this is what his wife or his daughter is facing.
Sure.
Right? You need, and patriarchy imprisons men in the same way that it imprisons women. And so we really have to dismantle this in every way, in every sector, as quickly as we can.
I think that's the issue with, dehumanizing context. That dehumanizing context, they dehumanize both the oppressor and the oppressed as well. So, it creates this unlivable context. Prof, maybe just before I let you go, just one last sentiment from you in terms of your hope going forward. What is your hope going forward, or some of the changes that you would like to see in this area of unmasking and addressing sexual corruption in the country?
I'll say that I have maybe two hopes. I hope that by this documentary and this research that men in power have a better understanding of the harm that, their actions might cause, and that men in power will call out other men who they see doing things that are inappropriate, because it's a continuum. It's from the inappropriate jokes to the touching to the sexual corruption to sexual violence. It's all a continuum. So I hope that men will become more aware and will decide that they should also stand up for women and be real allies and help women, because we are all one, really. We're all one human race. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, on a more practical level, is that our policymakers begin to think really about how to address this type of corruption and begin to think about what can be done. So a country like Tanzania changed their anti-corruption laws a few years, well, not a few, maybe a decade or so ago, to include an offense of sexual bribery. And that offense does not criminalize the victim. So in that offense, if you're a public official, you're a public official and you request a sexual act from a person in the course of your employment, in order to give them, access to public service or public privilege, then you've committed an offense under that law. Brazil has also done that. So in Brazil, there's also a law that does that. What Brazil did that I thought was interesting was that the penalty for the sexual corruption increases if you are able to consummate the sexual intercourse. So if you request for a sexual act and it's not consummated, you are liable to between 2 and 6 years imprisonment. But if the sexual activity is consummated, you as a public official are liable to between 6 and 10 years imprisonment.
Sure. Okay.
And again, it doesn't criminalize the victim.
Right.
The victim is the person that reports. So I hope that we would do something to address this so that it doesn't keep falling through the cracks. I mean, we have a problem with corruption, but this is a terrible situation for women to be faced with. And I think the third thing I think that I would hope is that women, we continue to fight, continue to speak out, name it, shame it, don't hide. If there's bad behavior, don't stand for it. Don't stand for it, because if you let it go, another woman will be a victim the next day. I give this example that everybody remembers Uyinene's case in 2019. And in 2014, so 4 years, or 2015 maybe now, 4 years or 5 years before she was murdered, the perpetrator, the person that murdered her, was involved in a sexual assault against a nursing student and was taken to court. But for some reason, the lady, the victim at the time, she stopped going to court. So, of course, that was the end of the case, because they lost their star witness, their only witness. And, I don't know what happened, but I do know that our criminal justice system is very difficult and is brutal on women victims of sexual violence. So I'm sure that, it was just too much for her, and she eventually stopped going. So he got off, and guess what? 5 years later, a beautiful star was put out. So that's the thing. If we let it go, if men are to get away with this, or any perpetrator really, then it just creates impunity and gives them a chance to do it. And the next time, it could be fatal.
And it's grown this far, so it's about ringing the alarm, to stop this pervasive culture from continuing. Prof, thank you so much. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you for your sharing of your education and your time this evening. We've learned a lot, and I think our listeners have as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Katleg. It was great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Very great to talk to you. That is Prof Sope Williams joining us from the university's Faculty of Law, unpacking the pervasive problem of sexual corruption in the country.
Kayamandi, Clutersville. We've got you covered on 92.6. MFM 92.6. Move to the music.